Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Want to thank everyone for being here today and again, taking your time and being part of this committee. And for those people, this time we are on YouTube Live, so everybody that is able to join us today to hear the discussion. That being said, I will note just for the minutes, we did get information that Dr. Alvarado today is not able to join us because she is getting ready to go on a flight, but we do again appreciate everyone else being able to be here today. So with that, everybody should have received an email that has the supporting information and also the draft of the gating criteria considerations. So we're going to take a look at that. There were two new pieces of information. So when we get down to building absenteeism, we're going to take some time and just make sure we understand those pieces of information and helping that was requested last time to help us make decisions. And those pieces were, again, the student absenteeism information with quarantine students reflected, and the other was a staff absenteeism rate by building broken out, so everybody could take a look at. I think Latona is going to share the screen so we can take a look at where we're at on the gating criteria considerations and make sure that we're fine with everything there. Again, we will be looking at the bottom one. The top one, October 5th through 16th was last time, but you can see that as comparison. This time again is in draft format and wanted to go through those. So the first one was when you look at the chart put out again by Sedgwick County, it looks like the average from those weeks is at 5.25%. If there's any questions, I'll pause briefly to see if we're on agreement. That's where we will leave that mark. Okay, no questions on that one. This one, community trend. Right now, we placed it between the two. If we're fine, I think we can still leave it between, or if there's strong feelings either way, but looking at that, we put in right between yellow and orange. Okay, we're okay with that. The next one was community criteria. You can
Heather,
see
this is Andy.
Mhm.
What contributes to moving it from yellow to in between? Just curious.
Sure, I think that's fair to say. When you look at that and you look at comparisons from the 2 weeks, when you look at even down at community criteria, right now we went from 122.3 to 161.3. So there are more cases going on in looking at it versus the previous week. Overall, when you look on the chart, they label it as stable, but stable is also listed in yellow and orange. So the determining why we put it right in the middle and can have discussion is because the number went up.
Okay, so it's somewhat dependent on the other factors that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think community trend would say, is the amounts that we're seeing higher than before? And again, up for discussion because everybody has that same information. If people feel differently, I think if everybody feels it should still be in the yellow, we can move it back down to solid yellow.
Well, would it be fair to say that, the way that I guess I interpreted it would be that green would be if cases were decreasing, yellow would be, like, I guess, a stable from 2-week period to 2-week period. Orange would be a stable, but yet the numbers were going up, but that whole criteria is stable, and red would be increasing. That's how I just had always interpreted those colors.
With that being said, where are you guys most comfortable with that landing?
I agree with where it's at.
Just as a follow-up question, I think this one is helpful to hear from the doctors, especially since it's more community-based than maybe some of the other ratios that are measuring, Sedgwick County as a whole. So I'd be interested in hearing feedback from the doctors on the call as well, if they don't mind.
This is Marty Turner. I think, overall it's been pretty stable, but there are a few upticks in the numbers. So, and I was just looking at the numbers a little bit ago from Sedgwick County, and for just the past couple of days, it's actually, more orange red. So overall, I think we're still, right in between. That yellow orange is actually a good place to put it. That it is trending up a little bit, but I don't know that it's enough yet. I think, this week's been a little different week. I worked all weekend, didn't really see much, but we're seeing a few more now, but I can't say that it's a lot more than what it was, before. So I think we are on that cusp of, can the numbers really shoot up, or are they going to flatten back out? But they are trending up just a hair right now.
What do we know about what's going on in our buildings? Because as far as numbers of positives in our buildings, because I could see that being something that might help us determine whether we're orange stable or yellow stable.
I can share some information on that regarding our staff. So we have the dashboard that is updated or posted on Fridays, but I can give you some up-to-date information since Friday, if that's helpful. Since that dashboard was posted on Friday, we have 8 new positive cases regarding our staff. We have 1 at the elementary, 1 at the middle, 1 at the high school, and 5 at support building. So that's just information that would have been posted on that dashboard. If we were to update it, I just gathered that information in preparation for this meeting today so that we could share that regarding positive cases in staff. I don't have the student information for that right now, but I could speak to the staff.
I have the student information and I gathered it as of the last gating criteria meeting, and I can break that down even further if someone would like that broken down even further. But as of the last gating criteria meeting, we have 22 secondary students. 2 of those are remote, 4 elementary students, and then 7, that's district personnel and offices. And mine does include staff and students.
So it's fair to say that that uptick that, we're starting to kind of see in the community, we're seeing that in our buildings as well. So I think, for me, that probably I would lean more towards where it's placed as well, seeing that we're seeing some of that trickling into the buildings.
Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Shipley is saying right now and what several people have said before. And that was, I think that is kind of something that warrants it to be placed kind of in the middle there, because when we look at the data and the community data, and it does say stable, but we have those 2 options where stable is concerned of yellow or orange. And it feels like maybe just circling the yellow doesn't quite reflect exactly what's happening in our district, but I wouldn't know that we're completely to the orange yet either. So I feel comfortable with it placed there in the middle, just my perspective.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. Any other comments on that area?
Yeah, Heather, this is Robin Folkers, and I just appreciate that conversation. I think it helps to really explain why it's moved a little bit, but I would agree that I think being between the yellow and the orange is a good spot for it, based on our community and our own cases in our buildings with our staff and our students.
Okay.
Well, and I would add with a little different lens, I've had 3 parents in the last 24 hours reach out to say, can I go to remote early? I don't think we can wait until November 9th. So I hadn't had a call like that for about 10 days, but I've had 3 within the last 24 hours. So for whatever reason, those 3 parents were a little bit more nervous now than they were a week ago. So I think that also supports moving that community trend to between yellow and orange.
Hey, Heather. So I agree. To me, it feels a little strange to leave it in the middle, but do we have a number to say, okay, this is our hard and fast number that we're moving to orange? I mean, are we looking at if we have 50 people come back positive, then we're going to move to orange, or are we just playing it by ear?
Unless this group wishes to set hard, fast numbers, I think it's looking overall at many different factors is what I'm hearing. is from when we look at the numbers about the community criteria below, there's Sedgwick County numbers to consider. There's local numbers, as Dr. Turner shared, of what he's seen in practices in the community, and kind of meshing those together and seeing where we land. And again, that's one component on the chart. But if people feel otherwise, we can definitely
One thing,
look
Heather,
at something else.
I would be somewhat hesitant to set a number, because let's all face it, my building would probably be the vast majority of whatever that number is. So I just would be, as I've said multiple times, I hate for Derby High School to dictate what happens at Swaney or something like that. So just a thought.
Okay. So are we okay leaving that when we look at multiple sources and then make a determination? Okay.
I like leaving it in between as well. I definitely don't think it should be solely in yellow. I think just what everyone said, and then kind of anecdotally from an experience at MedExpress, I think the urgent cares in any place that can do rapid testing right now, like they are seeing such an increase of people and have kind of their own comments as well on the number that they're seeing. So I think it's better suited in between for right now.
I would agree that I believe it's better suited in between as well, for reasons other people have said. I would also add that it notes the conversation that we're having right now. And it also shows that there's a difference between where we were last time, which I think others are appreciating, and will want to see that our committee was responsive to some of the changing dynamics we're seeing.
Thank you. Then we will plan to position between yellow and orange. The next one is community criteria. Again, this comes directly from the Sedgwick County chart about, so making sure we look at our numbers with how those add up this time. That does move us up to red in this area, having 161.3. Any questions on that one?
Heather, this is not a question, but just a clarification. The numbers that we typically use is that new community diseases number. It only drops it by 1 or 0.6, I think, but I just want to, if we're going to use those, we should be using that new community disease cases per 1,000 residents. So it's 82.4 and 78.3. It's still in the red. It just makes our total 160.7 instead of 161.3.
Okay, we will get that updated. Latona, if we can note that, and then we will get that updated. Okay. The next one, we're going to spend a little time on. Last time, again, the committee requested additional information. In looking, you can see for the chart right now, another one kind of between, we're thinking yellow and orange. But you'll notice we did put that little caret on there because I think it's important to note, and this is where buildings often feel like if we mark in yellow or mark in green, and we're experiencing, as you see at a couple buildings like Derby High School in Cooper, that are really in the red at this point. So we're going to take a closer look at data, and keep in mind we're kind of looking at yellow and orange and see if we feel comfortable when we get done with that. So I'll turn it over to, I think, Holly, you had student absenteeism information with quarantine students being reflected and what that looks like. I think we are on mute.
Good to know. Thank you. So when we look at our students who are quarantined as absences, and that was one of the things that the committee requested the last time we met, it does show that we are off more than 3% in some of our schools, more than 6% in others, causing them to be yellow or orange, or more than 9% in some, causing them to be red. Keeping in mind that this is historically for the last 2 weeks, so the time period from the 28th through October 9th, and that the numbers you see out to the side represent each school in the each student in the building times the number of days that are in that time window. So when we look at our buildings across our district for the 9/28 to October 9th time interval, you'll see that we have Cooper that is more than 9% higher than what they were at this time last year. That several of our other elementaries remain in the green. We have Oaklawn, who was at 93, which would give us about a 7% absenteeism rate. That is now at 87.3, which would give us more than additional more than 6 compared to last year. Park Hill is in the green. Stone Creek, we do not have comparison data for. Swaney and Tanglewood and Wyantier also green for now. And then Derby Middle is at 82.4% present, which gives them an absenteeism rate of 7.6, which is higher than where they were at this time last year. Derby North Middle puts them in the yellow. They have the attendance rate of 83.7, which puts them at about 16.3% of an absenteeism rate. And then for the high school, they are at 71.8% attendance, which gives them a higher absenteeism rate as well of above 25%, which is more than 10% higher than last year. Again, these numbers that we look at are the ones that the committee asked for last year. So those students are still receiving academic support and streaming into classrooms. It does represent, however, the combination of students who are positive and absent in general, and also those students who are quarantining.
Thank you. Any questions for her? Okay. If not, next we have Becky that will share the staff absenteeism information and go over that and answer any questions you guys have on that data.
All right, so I am going to start on the second tab of the spreadsheet that was sent out by Heather to the gating committee. This is our absentee rate for our staff as compared to historical data. So I want to preface this just with, this is just 1 year. This is just a comparison with last year. We feel in order to actually get a baseline of data, we would need many more years worth of data to compare, and we don't have that at this time that we can look at. But we did want to try to give some sort of reference there so that we could look at this time last year so that it would kind of go in line with the way that the student absentee data was being reported. So also, this is not an actual criteria on our gating that's been approved by the board, but it was information that was asked to be shared and considered. So this is what we have to share with you today. So on this, we start up here with the district. We have, this is the percent that is present. And so we have teaching staff, and then we've broken it out by administrators, support, and classified staff. So if you look at that, we have teaching staff 93.72% present. And then if you look at last year, all staff teaching staff was 94.63. So a tiny difference there in the percent. And then we were asked to break this down by building. So one thing I noticed, I was thinking, you know, from my HR perspective too, like shout out to the Cooper teaching staff. They were 90% last year during this time, and look at them, 96 percent present right now. So there were a few buildings that came out that way. And then when I go over to the other tab here in just a minute, I'll show you how we can maybe see how COVID is impacting our staff attendance. Because another thing I want to point out too is that our staff is absent for a lot of different reasons right now. It's not all COVID related. There are many reasons for those absences. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But as we go down through the buildings, you would be able to see there the comparison from this 2-week window to our 2-week school window from 2019 as compared with 2020. So we don't have a lot of variance between the years. We do see, if you look here at Oaklawn, regarding their teaching staff at 91% present, and then last year it was 96. So there is kind of a difference there, but also when I process COVID cases, I'm not noticing a big influx there. So that's just to let us know that there's something else going on, other possible reasons for absences there. We don't have any data to compare Stone Creek. That's another piece of, I want to caution you when we look at this data, because we did reboundary all of our elementary schools between last year and this year. We lost a lot of sections. For example, at Derby Hills, we lost 8 sections of teachers that were reallocated to other buildings. So there are some things to caution you with this data, and with also closing Pleasant View and opening Stone Creek. So all of that data has been provided there in that spreadsheet that was shared with you. So I'm going to jump over to the building attendance snapshot. And this is a little different way to look at the data. This is not a historical comparison to last year. This is just right now's data. And it is a difference from the average. So we've listed here the teaching staff up here, and they are just in order from the shout out to the Tanglewood teaching staff, 97% present. That's pretty great. And then you can see how they go down. We went ahead and put the difference from average up here on these ones that were a little bit lower. So you can see where we had a Swaney teaching staff difference where only 81% were present there for a little while, 12% different from the average. And then we look down at our administrators, certified support, and classified support staff, and you can see that we had a discrepancy there with Cooper, where 82% were present during this 2-week window. So that was, again, another difference from the average. So again, just another way to look at this data with staff absenteeism. And if anybody has any questions, that was kind of, I know, a quick rundown and a little bit of explanation, but if anybody has any questions about that, I'd be happy to try to address those.
Any questions for Becky? If not, thank you for gathering that information, and thank you, Holly, for compiling. I know that takes a lot of time, and appreciate your efforts of getting that done. And I know our finance office also helped with.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I was just about to say it took a lot of effort on a lot of people's parts to gather this, but it's definitely helpful information to be able to look at and consider as we make these decisions.
Very good. With that being said, I think we'll go back to that gating criteria chart, the green, yellow, orange, red. Initially, building absenteeism was placed between yellow and orange, since we did have, as you could see, several of the elementaries being in green. However, we did have Cooper in red, in Oaklawn in yellow, and then kind of where we were. Are we comfortable with it in the middle, or do you guys feel placement should be somewhere else?
This is Andy. Just for clarification, so for the actual building absenteeism, actual percentage that we're using.
I'm sorry, you cut out. I heard
Sorry.
about using.
What is the actual percentage that we calculated for building absenteeism?
Sure, we can go back, or in your email, you guys have that chart, but we can pull it back up to take a look at. Holly, do you want to talk about what the actual percentage was there?
think she's muted.
Holly, if you have.
There you go. Sorry. If we want to give me just a few minutes here, I can go back and average the exact average for the entire district.
Well, and just for clarification, the actual percentage that we're using does not include quarantined students, correct? I mean, that's the actual guidance that we provided for the gating committee from the board. I think the question was asked last gating committee, what would that look like if we included quarantine folks? But as far as the actual percentage use, that was not my understanding.
So I think what he's asking for is what is the percentage of without the other information.
Okay, so we're wanting the overall, do we want it for remote or in person or both?
Yeah, I get, and it would be, yeah, I don't know that it's clearly defined. Again, I think the question came up last meeting to include people that were on quarantine, but I don't know that that's the intent of this actual absenteeism. As we understand, a lot of those folks are still learning from home, and many don't have any, aren't dealing with the virus itself. So I think there needs to be some clarification there and just make sure we know what percentage we're using going forward.
Yep. So I'm happy to calculate either one. I just want to make sure that we're calculating based upon the committee's wishes, because I believe last time there were quite a few questions of, how the quarantine students were represented, and if they were, and the request was that we emphasize or look at the absenteeism percentage based upon them being counted as absent.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if we exclude quarantine kids from counting as absent, then all we're really measuring in the absentee statistic is the non-COVID related absences, correct?
That is correct.
So the absenteeism with COVID kids counted as, or with quarantine kids counted as present, would tell us how we're doing with flu, how we're doing with cold, how we're doing with doctor's appointments and other situations. But for this purposes, taking them out renders the statistic meaningless, I would think.
And I just want to add a little bit of clarity with that. If we have a student who is out with COVID-like symptoms, we don't know if it's COVID or the flu or cold or allergies until further information is gathered. So even if we take the quarantine out and we don't, like, if we're looking at just illnesses, even that's going to be a skewed kind of information, because some of those kids come back positive, some of them do not. And it just depends on what information they come back with from a doctor.
And are we retroactively coding those kids as quarantined once we get information on that? That was my understanding.
Not retroactively, but like if they are all of a sudden, then they get a positive test from that information moving forward.
Upon receipt.
But we're also pulling out, if we're pulling out all the Q kids, then you're assuming that every kid on quarantine is getting remote learning, and that's not the case either. Not every kid that's on quarantine is getting full remote learning. And they're just coded with Qs. And if we're pulling out all the Qs, then that's not, I mean, the whole purpose of the building absenteeism is to know how COVID is affecting your building. So I think it would be very skewed if we didn't use the quarantine data.
Just for clarification, are the kids that are on quarantine counted as absent when they are on quarantine? Like for records for the state?
No.
Okay.
No, they're counted as present when it's record keeping for the state. I just wanted to make another point about including or at least considering the quarantined students. The gating criteria was decided before we got rolling, before we actually had kids in the building. And once we had kids in the building, that's when the quarantine piece came into play. And I don't think that was even considered really, that we would have hundreds of kids quarantined and how that gives us such a good snapshot of how COVID is affecting the building. So I just think that's something to consider, whether you want to change the gating criteria or not. I think it's key to discuss every time we meet, to look at the differences when you consider the cues versus the regular attendance.
And then I would propose that we look at both numbers and then see what the trend data on that tells us.
We also need to remember that a cued student can't be marked absent. So while they're not counted in the absenteeism numbers for the state, it doesn't mean that they actually showed up to that remote class.
Okay, so I have a clarifying question there. So it's a requirement by the state that if a student is quarantined, whether they show up or turn in any work or do anything with that class, they have to be marked present. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
So the state is asking that if they are quarantined and they're receiving services, that we go ahead and mark them as present, just as we would our remote learners, as long as they're participating in learning.
Okay, so they do have to be participating in learning to be marked as present.
But we haven't gone back and changed kids who have cues in Skyward. We haven't gone back and changed them to absent when they don't show up for their Zoom meetings and things. The teachers cannot override it. So it would have to be done through attendance, and we just have not done that. It's too many to keep up with block by block with so many kids on quarantine for the high school anyway.
So we did have a secretary's call, Nikki, was that about 2 weeks ago, where we clarified information for that to be shared with secretaries for them to make those changes. But it sounds like with Ms. Strecker, we need to do some clarifying there.
That, I'm going to weigh in here. We're talking about an economy of scale. It is not reasonable for my teachers to do that. We are not talking about an elementary with 30 kids that one teacher is responsible for.
Yeah,
If this
and so
data
what
point needs to be changed, then I think we change it. But the high school teachers cannot be going back, seeing if a kid's Zooming every 4 minutes and going to the attendance office to override a code that they cannot do.
Yeah, and so the request is that we would only change it when there was a parent call to the office for a doctor's note, or one of those excused reasons that a parent would typically call into the office.
Okay, so with that being said, we have lots of information here. I think lots of, again, details of stuff. If you look at it both ways, either one source or two sources, I think the question is are we comfortable with it in between, or would that make a difference if you only used one or the other? Again, I think the point that some people made was when we look at building absenteeism, we're trying to say how many kids are really there to be learning, how many kids are being affected by this to help guide our decisions. Again, this is one guiding point in the midst of everything.
I'm comfortable with it where it is. The only thing I would maybe ask to consider is, do we want to have two different marks for that? Do we want to have a secondary mark and an elementary mark? Because at some point the learning modes could diverge between the two groups. And I think this indicator is going to be a key in determining when that happens. And so if we look at those two separately, that might help us. Again, I don't think it makes a difference today, but it might make a difference down the road.
That's pretty much what I was just going to comment on as well, Clint. And as far as whether if we're looking at true absenteeism rate, whether they're quarantined or out for a doctor or sick or whatever, I mean, if we split it, and I'm not a foreseer of the future, but if we split it, I would be willing to guess that if you take all the quarantines out, you're going to have a drastic drop. And it could be the difference between green and yellow versus with the true absenteeism rate of everybody in there, it could be more orange red. And so are we making the right decision if we're wanting just true absenteeism rates to pull quarantined kids out?
And I think it's a little philosophical discussion too. Is it being ill or being impacted? I heard a couple of board members on Monday night saying they're getting lots of email from parents whose kids are on quarantine, and even with our best efforts, it's still going to be impactful. So is that number going to talk about just illness, tracking that, or tracking impact? So I think that's a bit of a philosophical discussion there for what we think those numbers are intended for.
And so just to give you a sense, if you look at the numbers last year, our absenteeism rate at the same time for the second tab where quarantine kids are reflected as absent to reflect that impact is 19.37. And for this year, our absenteeism, got it backwards. Last year it would have been 11.06 and this year it would have been 19.37. So we would have gone up by 8.3 percentage points.
Holly, is that across the board, taking
That's
elementary and secondary?
That's elementary and secondary all together. And then if you use the first tab where quarantine students are not counted, our absenteeism rate would have been 7.53. So
in both cases, that would put you more in the orange, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So there's a big difference there when you count those quarantine kids across the district. Our absenteeism rate goes up almost 10 points. More than 10.
Okay. Other questions or data information?
Holly, as far as taking out the quarantine, you mentioned the 7% number. Is that above and beyond where we were? Because the building absenteeism is measuring the difference, right? It's measuring 3 to 5.9% above the baseline rate. So is that 7% higher, or is the actual absenteeism 7% with not including quarantine?
Okay, say that question one more time.
So the building absenteeism percentages that we're measuring, the 3%, 3 to 5.9, that's actually above baseline. That's not the absenteeism rate. It's not saying if you have 4% absenteeism, you're going to be yellow. It would be 4% over what you normally have, right? So if our absenteeism is 5% normally and we're at 8%, then we would fall in yellow because we would be 3% over what's normal. So my question is, as we compare this year to last year, taking out quarantine, again, just for informational purposes, are we actually still in orange? You had mentioned a 7% number, or is the 7% the total absenteeism?
So if we take out the quarantine kids numbers, our number of absenteeism for last year at this time would have been 8.6. And then this year it would have been 7.53.
Okay, so the actual difference is just a little bit over 1.
Yeah.
And that's what we're actually supposed to be measuring.
That is correct.
Okay.
So thank you for clarifying that. So it's really not 7%. It is 1%.
Okay. And then if we do include quarantine, just again, for informational purposes, is the sorry, you'd mentioned it 12%. Again, is that total absenteeism, or is that 12% above baseline?
So total absenteeism at this time last year was 11.06. If we combine all of our schools, K-12. And then for this time, this year, it's 19.37.
Okay, thank you.
So Holly, based on that, where does that put us? Let's give us where are we landing there?
If what I'm hearing from committee members is that we should count the impact that the quarantine students has on our schools, then that would put us more in the orange. If we remove the quarantine kids, that places us in the green.
The only reason we have this meeting is because of the COVID. So if you take out the COVID impact, it kind of defeats the purpose.
And I also think that, as you look at staff and community members who are looking at, their perception of what's going on in the buildings, they're going to really question green. I mean, I think yellow to orange makes sense given that feedback and what people are actually seeing.
Our comfort level with yellow to orange based on all this discussion. Thumbs up. Anyone concerned? We're okay?
I think another thing this may say, it may say that our quarantine is working. If our other absenteeism is rising and this is helping get a handle on the infection. So it may say that quarantine is helping.
This also reflects that we are being impacted. I mean, we're still responsible for our remote learners and our quarantine kiddos.
So I had a specific question on the DHS remote learners absentee rate. It's like 74.6% checked in or are present, I guess. But is that, so that means we have 25% of the remote learners that are not checking in? Or did I hear Kathleen O'Brien say last meeting that they couldn't mark them present? I don't know. I've read some stuff on Facebook where people have had comments about it. So I just want to make sure that that's like accurate.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Holly, I was going to answer him. A quarantine student, if they're marked Q in Skyward, the way Skyward works is we cannot override that. So even if a quarantine student isn't showing up to my Zoom, I can't count them absent. I don't have any way to physically count them absent. So it's not a super accurate reflection to assume that all the quarantine students at the high school are coming to their remote learning opportunities. And then at the middle schools, they don't have the synchronous classes like we do. So they have less opportunities to meet those remote classes. So we can't count them absent. And so I don't think, that's why I think it's so important to keep that quarantine data in there, because otherwise it's not a true reflection of what's happening.
You were asking Paul Burke about remote students because the absentee rate is reported there for remote students and in-person students. And we've had a lot of students with connectivity issues, had trouble with the Zoom, had a lot of trouble with their Chromebooks. And so, there are those issues that do play into it. And some students have asked to come back to the building. We've brought back, 40 kids since September 25th who were doing remote and have asked to come back to the building, probably because of those issues. So that's kind of a fluid thing for the high school anyway. Kids are coming back and a lot of kids are asking to go remote. We've had, since September 25th, we've had 266 kids request a change. 227 of those have asked to leave the building to learn at home. So it'll be interesting to see what that attendance rate looks like, as kids move in and out.
Okay. So I think so really every Q kid is marked as attending.
Correct. That's not what's listed as an in-person versus remote. That has nothing to do with Q.
So really what that number is our people that have chosen to go remote.
Yes.
25% of them are absent.
Correct.
Okay. I understand that number. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on that? And again, I think we left it as between yellow and orange. Okay, and then the last one is hospital rate. According to the website and information, that's at 33%, right? 53%, sorry, right now.
It's 33, that's right.
Yeah, I think it is 33. I
Yep.
think it's wrong on that thing. So it's 33% on that, and that would put us in the green on that one. Okay. With that being said, we need to look at then modes of learning. Obviously, keeping in mind, I think we had a couple spots if we need to, and I'll remind this committee, and if we have anyone viewing, just as we work for decisions about where we land on the colors, not that every building has to remain in the same mode. For those people that are viewing, I think sometimes if there's spots or hot spots that need to be looked at, and we'll say that each meeting, then sometimes those need to be individually discussed. So right now, if you look at it as a whole, again, let the doctors weigh in. I know we have Dr. Neatery on here and Dr. Turner. Again, if you have any, we always ask your thoughts too about what you guys feel comfortable with as guidance, and then trying to land on a color here.
This is Dr. Neatery. I'm very comfortable with yellow, between yellow and orange. I do want to say that although this is a gating committee meeting, the concern I have is that we're focusing on, and of course that's inherent in gating committee meeting, allowing kids to come into the school. And I do have a big concern about those who are at highest risk of mortality from COVID. And I don't know if at the school, both for the employees and the students, they've identified the people who are at greatest risk for mortality from this condition. And if they have a list of those people, and that they kind of, maybe the school nurse stays in touch with them, because obviously the parameters for them are going to be different than for the general population. So, you know, diabetics, severely obese kids, asthmatics, smokers, the COPDs, the older employed, and that doesn't have to be a teacher. It could be a janitor or a cafeteria worker or a para. So I don't know if there's work on that or not.
Okay, I know we have a nurse on the line, so good.
We're not doing that, I don't think. I'm not at my building, but I think it's a great idea to compile that list and follow up for sure.
And really, the school nurses could keep in touch with those people, so it wouldn't have to be, and just point out to them where we're at, because we know in healthcare that people seldom understand that what's being talked about affects them. They think it affects everybody else. And so, you know, I won't go into more detail on that, but.
No, thank you, Dr. Neatery, for bringing that up. And I can speak to our employees and again, all staff, not just our teaching staff, but we do have, we are in tune with that with our employees who may have an increased risk through the Human Resources Department. And anybody who feels they may meet that criteria is encouraged to speak with us, and we have reasonable accommodations in place for them. Working with building principals, in some of those cases, we've accommodated with things that are easy to do within the school building, and then sometimes that may involve remote opportunities for our teaching staff as well. So those are all things that need to be taken into consideration and dealt with confidentially through Human Resources. And we definitely want to support all of our staff and keep those things in mind. I would encourage people, if they do feel they have an increased risk, to make sure that they have a conversation with us about that, and we will document that and follow up with them. And like you'd mentioned, you know, having a list and checking in with them, there are employees that I'm checking in with on a regular basis to make sure that we're accommodating them as best as we can. So thank you for bringing that up, because it is more than just our students in the building, but also our staff that's supporting them.
Other thoughts and feedback?
This is Dr. Turner. I agree with yellow is fine. I mean, I know we're very close to orange right now, but as a parent that actually has two girls just sent home for quarantine on Monday, they are both bored out of their minds. and they are ready to get back in their building as soon as they can. So I think the more we can keep the buildings open to keep students there, as long as, the administrators feel it's safe, we've got to keep the kids in the building, because as the person said before, if we've got 25% absent on remote, that's what I'm hearing too, is a lot of these kids aren't getting on remote and they're not learning, and their mental health is going to be terrible if we don't keep them in the building as much as we can. So I'm still an advocate for yellow at this point, but I'm not liking the way the numbers are going. So we definitely need to, keep telling people, wear your mask, do your, all of your steps to, prevent this. But, social distancing, all that's important. I just text Dr. Alvarado and she agrees yellow's good right now too. But, I'll leave the rest of it to the teachers to say, their mental health is important too, because I've heard a lot of, issues with them that they're not holding up as well as what we'd like either. So a shout out to them. They're doing a great job, but, hang in there, guys.
Okay, other feedback on that? Is the group good with yellow, or do we need to talk about any particular buildings? I see heads nodding. We're okay with yellow. Can we take a vote, see where we're at? I know we record that. Can we do thumbs up if we are okay, making sure we have the majority that are okay with, and then I'll have Latona if we don't have thumbs up, so we can talk about it. Okay, we have thumbs up from, so I want to make sure I have the no's that we are not okay with it from Burke. Is that right? Are you okay? You are okay with it? Okay. So, so everybody's okay. Becky, were you okay? Okay. Ms. Pernier?
I don't know. I'm struggling. Can I ask a question?
Of course.
We have the ability to separate it out, correct? Like we can still say early childhood in person, and I get mental health, but I think the numbers that we're seeing is at our secondary levels. And I just wonder, I don't know. I'm just going to say I'm struggling.
So I think I saw 3. I just want to confirm, and then we want to hear from those individuals, and then of course go from there. So I have Katie, did I miss that? Are you okay with where we're at with the recommendation of going in yellow? And then the other one was Mr. Hamlin.
I always like to wait and hear from my high school folks in particular to be able to, I mean, really, you guys are the ones that are in the thick of this and really in the trenches. I obviously agree completely at the elementary level, and I think middle school still on the right trend to be staying there. Yellow seems accurate. I just, I read a lot of the issues too and hear a lot of things. So I respect your guys' expertise and just wanted to see their kind of votes and needs first before I fully put the thumbs up there.
Before,
and can I,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I just want to ask a clarifying question for myself, I guess. So my assumption is once we vote on color, then we'll look at, kind of then how that breaks out. Because I know that if we go to yellow, I mean, it's coded in person, maybe hybrid.
That is correct.
Okay.
So we got to get a color. So if we're struggling with yellow, we need to figure
good
out.
with yellow. Thank you,
You're
Joel.
good with yellow. Okay. Ms. Pernier and Hamlin, just so we know, are we okay with yellow? And then we'll talk about what mode.
Yeah, I'm okay with yellow. I'm just old and apparently my reflexes are slow. So
okay. All right.
I had a question before you move to the next topic. I wanted to get that out of the way first. I might have a person approach me. If it changes dramatically in the next week, do we have to wait 2 weeks to have a gating committee meeting? If things change rapidly toward the negative, do we call an emergency meeting of this committee, or do we just wait for 2 weeks?
So at any time, like a snow day, we talked about, if we had an emergency, we could close a building down if we needed to do that. I think the plan is for parents that we would operate in 2-week intervals. And that is what we talked about at the board meeting, is 2-week intervals. So people could plan accordingly. But again, there is the but in the sense that, and again, it's like a snow day. And, or if you had a water main break or something else, if we came in some cases we are seeing in buildings that it spreads quickly. I mean, take when you look at the support numbers, if you ran where those support numbers are, and there's a building that it's gone through the building. So I think when you look at that, you have to make a decision, you know what I mean, on that piece, if that became an issue. Does that answer what you're?
Yes, I just had several people that were asking me, and I just wanted to make sure we were unified on our response.
Okay. I want to make sure we address concerns on the yellow piece. Anything else? I think we have, Ms. Prunier, did you have anything else on yellow, or we just?
No, it's fine. I'm good with
You-
yellow.
You're okay with yellow? Okay. So we will go on yellow, and then now we need to look at the mode. I think the recommendation right now would be somebody throughout. We need to talk about the high school, but are we okay with elementary and middle school running in person? Let's see where people are at that point right now. Everybody okay? I see, I'm making sure, Mr. Jones, are you okay? Okay, so we're 100%, looks like, on up to through middle school. Let's have discussion on high school, sounds like the concern. Do we run in hybrid or in person?
I guess I'll speak up for the high school. We after discussing it with several teachers and staff and administrators, we are strongly recommending hybrid for the high school. We cannot, as teachers, we cannot keep up with the kids that are switching back and forth due to quarantine. And it's really taking a toll on our teachers. It's taking a toll on our nurse. She's ready to walk out screaming. It's just very difficult for us up here with the kids moving back and forth. Remote would give us a chance to hopefully get caught up and get the quarantine kids back in person and give us a little bit of a break.
And I'd like to just follow up. I know that I am an elementary teacher, but I've heard since we met last and even over the weekend and on Monday from some high school teachers who are really expressing that. And that question of what they were seeing in the building, why weren't they going to remote or hybrid at that time? And so I would agree with Kathleen that, looking at that building, that would be an appropriate way to go.
To look at hybrid.
Yeah.
I have a question for all of our high school people who are on here. And as someone who's trying to support our staff and figure out what are the needs, and I mean, absolutely seeing the anxiety and the stress and all of that and trying to figure out what we can do, what about that hybrid model would be most helpful? Like, what is your feedback on that? I know, Kathleen, you talked about it just a minute, but does anybody have some specific ways that the hybrid model would be helpful to alleviate some of that, but also balance that with the needs of our students, with what's best for our students?
The biggest benefit at this point, we've spoken about it at the administrators. We've looked at the process. So we'd have 2 days in person with Group A, 2 days in person with Group B. Everyone would be remote Wednesday. We wouldn't necessarily have to teach synchronous classes. We could be able to assign kind of online work for the group that's not in person and vice versa. So that would give teachers a break. On top of just the stress of all of this, we've gone to a schedule where we meet the kids every day, which is great. I only have 3 classes to plan for instead of 6. But the issue is I don't get a break each day between those classes. And so the planning, it just keeps coming. It's like a bulldozer, it just keeps on going. And so grading is piling up on teachers, planning is piling up, trying to make remote kits to send home to students, because I have a remote, in my situation here in the science department, a lot of our science classes, we have remote classes that we're trying to make things for and send home to them so they have some kind of hands-on experience. The stress level is very high. And I know I spoke last time kind of against hybrid, but after speaking with administrators and some teachers, we've come up with a solution for those issues. And so I think this model that we're looking at now would be very stress relieving for teachers right now, because it would give people a day to just take a breath, because those remote only days, there are things that you could do. You're not having to deal with in-person classes and things like that. So it would just give teachers kind of a breathing day that I think is so desperately needed at this point. And it would help have less kids in the building. So we'd hopefully have less for the contact tracing issues and the quarantining.
Well, and I think it also goes to say that, synchronous learning is happening at every level, but the overwhelming burden of that is at the high school. I mean, that's where that is primarily happening. And so I think, that stressor is unique to that level. And so I agree completely with Kathleen that if they, I was honestly a little surprised last time when she didn't advocate for hybrid. And I know that at that time, the group really took her words and I think used that to inform the decision. And I would really hope that we would do that at this meeting as well. Because, I know that we've talked a lot about who is on the front line and who is in the rooms doing it. And, in terms of the high school, I mean, those are the teachers and the administrators and the support staff in that building.
I'm going to jump in. I have to leave at 2:15, so here is my take. Ms. O'Brien and Mr. Addis are sharing or representing thoughts from one stakeholder group. We have to answer to many stakeholder groups. I can tell you from observations, you look at what happened after September 21st, the numbers Mrs. Strecker shared, the number of students that moved from in-person to remote kind of goes along to what I'd said earlier, that people are fearing more the consequences of being quarantined than the virus itself. So if Derby High School were to go hybrid, in theory, we could potentially see a reduction in the number of close contacts being identified in classrooms. In theory, none of us know if that's actually going to happen. The close contact process has put Derby High School and other schools in the absolute crosshairs of many people because we're basically the agents of Sedgwick County. And we have nothing we can do about that. It is what we have to do. But again, there's multiple stakeholders involved. I have a young man yesterday that was quarantined, football player. A lot of us don't think about this.
He's going to just leave us hanging.
Leave us hanging. There you go.
I would say if Tim comes back, I'll stop talking, but I would say the big difference between 2 weeks ago and this week is 2 weeks ago, kids were coming back from quarantine and we had the majority of those kids coming back. Now we've had a whole new rash of quarantines this week. And so I can just see that second wave coming. And I just think, we've had some experience now. We've had several weeks under our belt with this system. And I think the hybrid model for at least 2 weeks would just give teachers a chance to reset, give kids a chance to reset, get the quarantines that are currently happening finished, and hopefully get more people back into the building in 2 weeks.
If we can also hear, I know social, emotional, or mental health often comes up. We have, I think, Reagan and Rochelle or others on the line. If you have feedback to on that topic.
The quarantine kids, I think, are suffering mental health wise because then they don't go to activities. They can't go to, volleyball or whatever. I think they're more afraid of being quarantined than the virus, like Mr. Hanlon was, I think, trying to say. And I think that, Dr. Turner said it does affect mental health of the kids who are quarantined. But I think, especially if the schools have a way to check on kids more that are on quarantine, it's maybe a little bit easier, but I agree. I think hybrid would kind of give that time. And then the kids, as a parent, I have one on quarantine right now and I don't have to worry, okay, am I going to get a call today? And I think that's what parents are worried about too.
Okay, thank you.
I have heard reported from teachers in the classrooms that when the phone rings in the classroom, you can see the kids bristle. They're waiting to be called and told that they have to go home and quarantine. And that obviously that's not in every class, but that is something that would certainly be fixed, remedied, much lessened if we were on a hybrid rather than taking 8 kids out of each class that a positive case is in. You might have no close contacts, because if we have half the number of students in the building, we should be able to seat students at least 6 feet apart in virtually all of our classrooms. There will be a few where that will still be a problem, but overall, that's going to reduce the contact tracing.
The kids call it the Rona call. So when the phone rings, it's the Rona call. Someone's getting the Rona and they have to go home. So that's kind of the running, not so funny joke here at the high school.
And the fewer number of students in the building also reduces the risk to our staff.
Okay. Anyone else to add anything before we?
I have a question.
Okay.
One is 2 parts, or 2 different parts there. One is, and I don't pretend to understand the high school schedule at all, but is a hybrid schedule doable? And then also, how does that affect our parents? With their doing, with high schools, do they just stay home by themselves? Would that not be affecting the parents, or would it matter?
Well, I think, freshmen are 14. That's the youngest. They stay home by themselves. That's not too much of an issue. I think having kids in the building Monday and Tuesday and having the other half of the kids in the building on Thursday and Friday is very doable. I think the kids would appreciate the fact that they would be in person. They would have that social contact time. They would be able to see their friends and get help directly from their teachers, and balance that with some time with some remote learning. So at least for 2 weeks, there's going to be a lag. If we were to go remote, there might be a student who turns up positive a week from Friday, and their contacts could go back. And so we still would be probably quarantining kids, but eventually that number would drop drastically of the number of students quarantined.
So I think I want to think about what some of the things you guys were saying from a little different perspective too. Like when you talk about kids cringing when the phone rings and they don't want to be sent home, and the different stakeholder groups that Mr. Hamblin mentioned, we have a lot of people who we've heard at board meetings speaking. They're upset that their kids are out of school, and I think we need to consider that even if that a hybrid could seem as if they're all in quarantine a couple of days a week. And I'm not advocating for it or against it. I think we just need to look at that whole picture that our kids are going to be in school less days. There are some kids who haven't been quarantined yet. There's some kids who've been able to come to school every day. And when we go to the hybrid, we're shifting that a little bit towards where everybody has those days at home. And I think we need to look at the balance of the mental health and all of that. And it may still be that, I'm not saying hybrid is not the way to go by any means. I just think we need to consider all of those things as we try to balance that, because there are some kids and some parents who they're cringing when the phone rings because they don't want to go home, but then this causes them to be home 3 days a week and in school 2 days a week. All of the kids, not just the ones who were in close contact or tested positive or something like that. So just adding a little perspective to the discussion as well.
I'll just throw this number out there. We have quarantined over 550 students at this building since school started. There are 170 or so out on quarantine today, but since school started, this has affected more than 550 students.
Tim's back on just before we lose him again.
Note to everyone, don't put your hotspot on the dash. It becomes a really hot spot. So anyway, I was just basically sharing that there's lots of different camps, and everybody is justified in their emotion and thoughts. Hybrid may reduce the close contacts, which is an incredible strain on student, staff, parents. We don't know if it would for sure, though.
Mr. Hamlin, I know there's been lots of discussion and you were there for the majority of it. If you had to make a recommendation at this point as the high school principal, where are you recommending?
Okay, well, you're asking me to basically alienate myself in front of all of my staff.
Well,
so
I don't mean, I just, and
I'm
again,
being-
I think everybody, but it's fair. You see it day to day and representing, on that.
So I do this, my parking lot, there's way more cars than there's not. So I vote that we remain in person, but I support any decision I would hope that the full committee would make. Otherwise, we're wasting a lot of time and let Mr. Hamlin just make the decision every 2 weeks.
Yeah. I know there's lots of
Got my
discussion.
vote.
Okay.
I gotta go.
All right. I knew you had to leave. That's why I was asking.
One of the things that I think is helpful in situations like these is what would make one, if this isn't the situation that we were going to do this, what additional information, what would have to change in order for us to make that decision? So clearly the gating chart contemplates that a building or a level could go hybrid in yellow. So if this isn't the circumstance that triggers that, what additional things would we be looking for that would trigger that?
Nikki, can you talk a little bit about how many from the last time you had reported, and I think we have in the minutes, about how many people were in quarantine then and then how many people are now? So what are we looking at on that difference?
So what the numbers I have, Allison might actually have a report because Tim ran a report this morning for the high school, but he just jumped off. But as of last time we met, we have had 18 students or staff members test positive at the high school. So that's just the last 2 weeks. And then when we consider all of them, as of this past Friday, we had 149 students, and that's in the district as of Friday, in quarantine. Now we had on Monday at Derby High School, between that number that I just said on the quarantine, from Friday afternoon to Monday evening, just to give a little perspective here, we had we had 7 or 8 students or staff members who came back positive. So on Friday afternoon and on Monday, our quarantine numbers skyrocketed. So I think Allison has a little bit more of the updated report, or Tim had it run this morning. I apologize. He was going to have that quarantine report ran.
If you look at the week from, I've run it a couple different ways, from last Monday through 2 days ago, from the 5th through the 12th, we had 221 kids in quarantine. As of today, right now, today, we have 170 students in quarantine from Derby High School.
So the group, for comparison, so you know from last time, what we had going to be on that Monday was 103. So to Clint, to your item, we've jumped from 103 to 170. And I think, again, we set hard limits, but it's like at what point, you know what I mean, is that, and where is that concern at?
Okay.
Reagan has.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Dr. Turner, you're going to.
Well, I was just going to ask a question in terms of if we go hybrid, that does not help the quarantine kids at all because they are home no matter what. So I guess that's the question I have is if we're going hybrid, the couple of comments I've heard from my daughters is, one, it's the synchronous classes that is driving everybody nuts, trying to do in person and online at the same time. That's where they're having the struggles, is the teacher trying to do both. And so somehow if we go hybrid, it needs to be asynchronous learning. But in terms of, is it going to knock the quarantine numbers down? It's hard to say on that. As Tim said, there's no way of knowing that. But in terms of hybrid versus not hybrid, that doesn't change anything to the quarantine kids because they're home no matter what. So they're going to have to be remote totally. So then to me, it almost says, we either stay in person like what we're doing, or we go totally remote. Because I guess I don't see how the hybrid necessarily helps a whole lot at this point. So that's what I'd be interested in hearing, is how it makes a difference.
From the teaching perspective, the hybrid model, if we go with 2 days in person and then 3 days out. So A group would come on Mondays and Tuesdays, B group would come on Thursdays and Fridays, and then everybody would be remote Wednesdays. We would be able to teach asynchronously, meaning we wouldn't have to teach synchronously. We could have activities for the online / quarantine kids to do while the other kids are in person. And you would still have to have some kind of hands-on activity or kind of in-person activity at some point for those quarantine kids. We're used to that. We can make that work, but we wouldn't have as much synchronous teaching as we do right now. Right now, every single one of my classes is synchronous, except for I have one remote class, but all my classes are synchronous, and they weren't at the beginning of the year. And so I've had enough kids switch to quarantine, or not even to quarantine. I've had enough kids switch remote to remote only. And then the kids that do get quarantined, it's a logistical nightmare trying to keep track of who's supposed to be where, who's supposed to be on a Zoom. I had to apologize to a student the other day. I snapped at her because she was trying to get on an online test. And I'm like, why are you online? You're supposed to be here. And she goes, no, I'm quarantined. Well, the school hadn't been told she was quarantined because the health department had quarantined her. So I'm having a hard time keeping track of where students are supposed to be. I think the hybrid model for 2 weeks would give us all a chance to take a deep breath, regroup. It would get those quarantine kids a chance to finish out their quarantine. We would hopefully be able to avoid some more quarantining for 2 weeks. Like Mr. Hamlin said, I'm not sure we could predict that, but I think just by the sheer decrease of numbers in the building, it would decrease close contacts. But as soon as that big wave of quarantine kids came back, my classroom was back up to 32 kids in it. And so all of those close contacts are now there again, and it makes for round 2 of the next batch of kids getting sent home. It's a number.
I have a question about that then. So if it's a kid who goes on a Monday and Tuesday, they're in class for school, and then they're remote on Wednesday, everybody's remote. So on Thursday and Friday, they're not having any class.
They would have online, they would have activities, they would have things that they would need to do online, but they would not have to necessarily Zoom into the class. Now, teachers could still do synchronous if they wanted to, but we would have the option of providing them some online activities. We already use Canvas for that anyway. So providing them some, like I could do some virtual labs or do some reading activities or things where they're doing that at home on their own, at their own pace, and they don't have to necessarily do it at exactly class time.
I'm just thinking about my own kids and that accountability there.
No, they would still have they would still have to show up and do stuff, but they wouldn't have to necessarily physically Zoom in with class.
So if you're hybrid at the high school, are the class sizes smaller, or do we just have the same size classes with half the kids in the building?
The way that the AB designations are, some classes would be significantly different in size. I have one class where it's pretty evenly A and B, the way the kids are labeled. And then I have one class where I have more A's than I do B's. So it's not a perfect system. It's not 50% of your kids are gone out of every class, but it would decrease kids in the hallway. I mean, all the things that Mr. Hamlin mentioned last time, it would decrease kids in the hallway. It would decrease kids in the cafeteria. It would decrease those close contacts. I could spread kids out more in the classroom. Teachers could spread them out more. It's not a perfect system. The AB system's not perfect, but I don't know how you would make that work at the high school level anyway, but it would be. And I'm telling you, I was not on board for hybrid 2 weeks ago, but from what I've seen, from what my teachers are going through, what Joel and I have had dealt with through DNEA and through teachers coming to us with everything, I've had teachers crying. I have teachers are not in a good place right now. And I can't emphasize, I know obviously I care about my students. I want to see them. I want them in person. I want them here, but my teachers are not okay. And that's an issue that I think this committee really needs to address, because I don't see that getting any better. And, you know, I think that second wave is hitting us right now, and I'm not a doctor, but I teach the stuff to the kids. So I think that second wave's on the way, and I think cold and flu season's on the way, and it's just going to be a bad combo.
One question that I have is, we talked about the number of cases we've had in the last 2 weeks. I think it was 18 with kids and staff. How many cases did we have the previous 2 weeks? Do we have that total?
I can give that if you give me 1 minute.
Okay. And while she's looking that up, the one point I wanted to make in yellow, the original chart we have, I don't think it's on the one that was sent out. I mean, the primary mode that's listed is in person. There's a subheading that says maybe hybrid. Then you move to orange, and it's really, I think we talked about this before. The intent was orange was either in person or hybrid, and both say maybe hybrid or maybe remote. So for me, yellow seems like it should be in person. If we get to orange, perhaps hybrid makes more sense. But anyways, I wanted to point that out as well.
Mr. Watkins, between our last gating committee, so between the 16th through the 30th, so the previous 2 weeks that we had looked at, right? It was 17.
Okay, so two weeks over 2 weeks, we had one more actual case when you compare those two numbers.
And only because I have helped with the majority of these cases. One thing I will say about the previous 2 weeks is that because many of them were on the football team and had been sent home, a lot of them didn't come back because they started having symptoms. And so the kids who got quarantined from that was less than the ones from this last 2 week period, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But 17 positive cases.
Okay.
So and this is just my interpretation. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think Ms. Pernier.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I just was going to reiterate what Andy said, because if I look at this chart, and I've said this before, this is not the first meeting that I've said this. If we are in yellow, it says in person. There is no separation. That's why I said I'm struggling, because had we gone to orange, we would have had that ability to separate early childhood and 6 through 12. The way I read this chart, and maybe I'm not reading it right, is that in yellow, it basically says there's nothing there to separate. There's nothing there to differentiate the differences between the levels. And that's why I said I was struggling. And that's why, and like I said, I've said it before, this is not the first time I brought this up. So, but, and I get it. People are struggling. I don't think people are struggling at the high school. I mean, let me rephrase that. People are struggling at the high school, but I think people are struggling at the elementary and the middle level just as bad. I've talked to several who are struggling just as bad. And Luann made the comment the other night during the meeting, the same as we have kids who are struggling with online learning and being quarantined, we have kids walking that hall that are struggling. We have kids walking that hall who are in trouble. So, you know, we have to look at everything and balance everything out. So that's my
feedback. I did this for the group, and, you know, this one's taking longer and being very careful with the decision because there's a lot to weigh in. This is a big one, and when the data and those feelings are there. So Joel, you had something?
Well, and actually, I completely agree with what Mrs. Prunier said. But I was thinking about it, I think, totally from the opposite way, because I guess I assumed that when I looked at yellow, you know, it says in person, maybe hybrid. And so to me, I guess I just interpreted that as, you know, if we're in yellow, then what we've been talking about with what Kathleen has been suggesting, and I agree with, would be that the majority of the district would be in person, but then we would have the ability to break out some buildings into hybrid. Where, like, you know, I know that on Orange, I'm looking at it, you know, the difference at Orange is that if we're in Orange, EC and 5 is in person, maybe hybrid, but 612 has to be hybrid, maybe remote. And so I think that's kind of where my, you know, I guess that's maybe where my vote for yellow went and how I was interpreting that.
And I think the other thing with that, if we were in orange, that would force middle to hybrid, where
Mhm.
right now, I don't think we think that that's necessary. So I do think that having some discretion and discernment in this, I don't see anything in there that precludes us from doing that.
I agree. I was interpreting it the way Joel just explained and what Clint's saying as well. I think we would have the ability to break this out by school, and perhaps it wasn't the high school, it was some other school that was having a cluster or something, that we would be able as a gating committee to consider those individual circumstances and make that decision based on it.
Are we at a point to see where people are at on this, or is there other thoughts that we need to put on the table? I think it's really the high school we're looking at in person. The other, as we move along, just to address that, there could be an elementary, as you saw that data, and we had one that staff started being out. If that had gone to kids and they started being out, there's a chance every elementary may run in person except for one elementary if the staff's taken out. So I think that we have to, again, I would agree with that, remain some flexibility based on the data and let the data drive those decisions. So, all right, let's see where we're at with, we'll go both ways, not saying it's the one, but the last, oh, sorry, do we have somebody else?
Sorry, could I just ask one clarifying question?
Yes.
Nikki, you said that when we met 2 weeks ago, we were at 17 positives, right?
Yes.
And then we added within the last 2 weeks, 18 more, right?
Correct. So the 2 weeks before that were 17. And then these last 2 weeks from the 30th that we met the last time until today, right? Like I'm going to say at 2/26, it is 18.
So
But
we
that
added
17 was from the beginning of school to last gating meeting, correct?
It was from the 16th of September through the 30th of September.
Okay.
So it was those 2 weeks ahead of time.
Just needed that clarification. Thank you.
Yes.
We added one student. Is that correct? Just making sure for the group.
Well, we've added 18, but the difference in the numbers is 17 and then 18.
Yep.
Yes.
I have a question. With our staff, how I feel like we're already struggling with filling absences with substitutes. How are we with substitutes just district wide right now? I was just wondering what that looked like.
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that a little bit. I am checking Frontline every single morning myself and every night before I go to bed to see where those vacancies lie. And we are really, I've been working with our substitute coordinator as well, and we really are in line with a typical year as far as filling those vacancies when it comes to classroom teachers. We do have some para support vacancies that are not being filled every day, but that is relatively typical when you look back. Those buildings are used to covering those in different ways. We have had an increase in staff positive cases. Nikki was talking about the data from the last 2 week period versus this one. We so far have had a total of 19 current and past positive staff members since July. But then we have a total of 10 currently. So we have had definitely an uptick in positive cases among our staff over the last 4 weeks, I would say, compared to what we started with in July. So we've kind of from July, like I said, we have had a total of 19, but then over the last couple of weeks, we've had 10. So there is a difference there, but I feel like we are able to cover those. I know that I've spoken with several building administrators, and there've been some times we're scrambling and we're looking for ways to cover those absences creatively, but we have almost 200 substitutes in our pool. We've trained them to cover remote classes, and we've given them some training on our safety and logistics plan because we were having some who were uncomfortable to come into the building. And so we provided some opportunities for them to learn about the different things we're doing with cleaning and with the mask mandate and things like that, which hasn't helped all of our substitutes to feel comfortable coming back, but we're processing more and more every day. I think Kelly processed 9 new substitutes last week. So we have a pool and we have coverage, and I would encourage principals who are having difficulty filling those to reach out to Kelly and myself, and we're happy to help with that. But overall, looking at at that. I've been wanting to make sure that I have a handle on it. So I've been looking at it every day. And we did have a pocket of staff members out, as you could see from the staff data that I shared earlier. There's a pocket of classified and support staff out in one building, and then a pocket of teachers out in another. And I won't lie that those weeks were a challenge. And we had to be real creative with coverage for those classrooms, but we're working through it. And I feel over this last week, we've had our teaching positions filled regularly, but we're looking for some ideas to, I know I spoke about this at the board meeting, but ways to blast out some social media, ways to recognize and appreciate our substitutes, and then that extra training piece to try to help them feel more comfortable. There's also some things in frontline that our teachers can do. Some of them were putting in their block of quarantine, and so a sub wasn't picking it up because they couldn't do all of those days of the quarantine. So breaking it into day by day or smaller increments, and then opening it up past your typical subs that you're used to using. If you open it up so that more can see it, those kinds of things help too. So good question, and definitely a concern that we recognize and are working every day to address. That was a long answer. I apologize.
No details. Joel?
Okay, so just a clarifying question for me, Becky. So how much of those, we've been filling those spots across the district, like especially at the secondary, how much of that has been done because teachers are, they've been asked to sub during their planned times and then they're volunteering to do that?
Yeah, so I don't have an exact number for you on that right now, but looking at frontline, I can see which ones are filled and which ones are unfilled, and they don't look as filled on frontline if someone is filling in with planned time substitution. So
because I know, and granted, I don't necessarily speak to a lot of secondary teachers, but I know the few that I have spoken with, there are some who have been doing that every day. So they're taking, they've got some time where they can just go in and fill in and sub and help cover those schedules every
But
day.
it adds to their overall stress level.
Yes,
So
it does.
They're already taxed teaching their own classes, and then they're giving up their plan time day after day to cover for subs that vacancies that are not filled with subs.
I would encourage them to talk with me, because I've not heard from anyone at the high school. I have talked with some middle school principals, but haven't talked with anyone at the high school about difficulties with that. So I would need to know about those concerns.
Okay.
Heather, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. With that being said, I know we've had to have, we had someone just exit off and they went ahead and gave me their response. What was Rochelle? She's recommending hybrid. So let's start with that, since that's one recommendation. Of course, we have where Mr. Hamlin was. Let's see where everybody is. We're looking at how many people are in favor for, this is high school only. Everybody else would be in person, of looking at hybrid. So I need to make sure where we're at. I've got Joel, Allison, Reagan, Robin, Clint, Jeff.
Clarifying question, what does this mean for remote only students at Derby High School? Like if they were to go hybrid, how does it change what their learning looks like? Is this going to be the time that they're impacted? Because I think a lot of, if it goes this way, a lot of our messaging so far is that, these decisions are impacting the in-person learners, but what does this do to our remote learners? Like Kathleen, I think you use that as an example that maybe you wouldn't be doing a live lesson every day. So what does that look like there?
For me personally, in my class, it wouldn't change a whole lot. My remote kids would still be, I would still have them Zoom in and be a part of my class just because of the structure of my class. But, for English teachers or for social studies teachers or others core subjects where they can just as easily give an asynchronous assignment to their remote students, I don't think it would have a dramatic impact on the remote learners at all. It's really the quarantined kids and the in-person kids that this is going to affect more than anybody.
Okay. So Kathleen, what I hear you saying is the remote learners will still follow their remote learning schedule just as they have been.
But right, but at that high school, I guess and I may be understanding wrong, but at the high school, they don't have separate teachers like
right.
the younger grade levels that are just in person or just remote at the high school, they're in.
So for example, I
In
have
some, yeah.
I have one remote only section.
Right.
I have one class that's remote only, and I have a remote only homeroom. I'm not going to do anything different for those kids.
Right.
They'll never know that we went hybrid because their schedule, their stuff isn't going to change. My in-person class and my kids that are quarantined temporarily, that schedule would look different for them, but not necessarily the quarantine kids, because they could still Zoom in if I'm Zooming with everybody. But the remote or the in-person kids would really be the only ones that have that schedule change affect them.
The remote only kids that are, or the remote only kids that have teachers that are teaching in person and online at the same time, what would that look like for them? Is that what?
Well,
that's right.
Yeah, that's what we've discussed here at the building, and it would really kind of depend on the subject, the class. Like I said, for me, I would probably still go ahead and keep my synchronous teaching because it's working okay for me. It's not ideal, but it's working okay. But it would give teachers, the hybrid schedule would give teachers that are being buried by the synchronous teaching a chance to come up with something different that works more appropriately for them. There's a lot of things that you can do where the kids can just work on their own, and you can do videos, and you can do online lessons and interactives and things like that don't necessarily need to physically Zoom with them every single class period. So they could have a day where it's just question and answer session where they literally just come and ask you, like the remote only day, the Wednesday could be questions and answers and just a time to discuss things. So it would lend to some flexibility with the idea that we aren't required to teach synchronously. So that's where I jump ship. If we're going to say that we're required to teach synchronously, I don't want to go to hybrid because that's not any better than what we're doing now. Right. If we have the option, as we've talked with the administrators and with teachers, if we have the option to stay to be more flexible and have some asynchronous learning, you're going to have teachers much more on board and happy about it. But
yeah, I get that. My question and what I was just trying to understand and make sure that I was understanding correctly. Like, for example, if you have those A-B groups of that it's an in-person and remote class, is that B group not the same lesson as what it's going to be Monday and Tuesday?
No. Yeah, it would be the same. So
right. I mean, because you're just splitting that. Right.
Which is why you wouldn't need to teach synchronously, because those kids had already, the A group had already done it. They don't need to Zoom into the B class and vice versa. So it would allow you to do some in-person stuff with just that smaller group of kids, and then repeat. And then you'd have a repeated lesson the next 2 days, which is what we're not getting right now. It's just every day. And it was a lot to take on all at once, with having class every single day. It is easier on the kids because they don't have as many classes to worry about. But I hear the kids telling me stress-wise, it's just as stressful because they're seeing classes every day. They have homework every night, and so it's neither system is perfect, but I think at this point it's worth it to give hybrid a try and see, what it does for us.
But if we're doing, my understanding was that your pacing continued even in hybrid, that the remote kiddos for those days, if you had your A group in and your B group was all at home, they were still doing the same type of activities for those lessons, because if you don't, then you've now just cut your pacing guide in half.
Right. And I think that's going to
You're only
vary.
teaching half the week's worth of lessons.
We have 130 teachers in the building. It will not be the same for every teacher. So Katie, I mean, we'd like to be able to give you a quick answer, an easy answer, but because of the variety of courses we offer up here and the different ways teachers approach things, it will be different. But those students who are remote only are not going to be left out in the cold. They will still have their instruction.
Not what I meant at all.
No, I know, but
trying to understand is if depending how this vote goes, when we have to communicate this first wave, and I know that there's going to have to be follow-up communication if there is a change at the high school, but needing to know up there, because what we've been saying in every gating message so far is this doesn't impact remote learning, but if it may have an impact, I just want to make sure that one, I take that line out, two, that I clarify that because I don't want to add to any confusion. So I understand completely that it's not
It will impact.
identical up there.
Right. It will impact remote students.
It'll have an impact just in the sense that we've not done it before. And so as teachers, we're going to be figuring it out as we go. We've been building this plane while we're flying it the whole time, so we'll make it work. But you know, it really is going to be a subject dependent difference. For my lab classes, it's not going to screw my pacing up too much because I can do my lab. I can just flip flop what I'm going to do between my A and my B. So it will slow us down a little bit, but it's not going, I don't think it'll have a huge impact on where we are academically. We also only have 3 weeks left in this 9 weeks. So we're all getting to the point where we're trying to wrap up a semester because we now have condensed a semester into a 9 weeks. And so, you know, we're getting to the end of the semester anyway. And so if we're gonna attempt this, if we're gonna try it and see what kind of impact it has, I think this is a good time to try it.
I think I would like to have some clarification from Dr. Putnam on that piece, because if they're for 2 weeks only going to get half of their algebra lessons, that significantly impacts, I mean, they're getting essentially 1 week's worth of learning if we're just teaching for 2 days.
So a point of clarification that goes along with the hybrid model. And I think, you know, all of us that have been educators or in classrooms for some time or observed a lesson in our child's classroom know that there are times in the lesson that are more direct instruction, when the teacher is explaining, when the teacher is demonstrating or modeling an activity or stepping students through. And then there is also usually a time in the lesson when the students are working independently. They are working in partnerships, or they are working on projects with their classmates and teams. And all of those, or even on their devices, completing online labs or online math classes in Pearson or Savvis. And so when you think about a hybrid model, what the teacher is doing is just sort of what Kathleen alluded to, whether it's algebra or science, it does look different from every class. So Ms. Strucker is right, Ms. O'Brien is right in that sense, in that I'm taking those things that are more teacher directed, that are more, I need to be there to explain them in person, and I'm walking them through there while I have my students there in person, unless it is something where I'm doing it via Zoom. Or making a recording of that explanation, which we did hear from students in the spring, that they actually liked those recordings because if it was an algebra problem, for example, I could see my teacher do the steps, and in class, once they're done demonstrating the example, if I didn't understand it, there's all kinds of other things that I need to do, but in a video, I can go back and I can retrace the steps, see where I lost my understanding, and go back. So in between, a combination of being intentional about what they plan in person, and then how they provide supporting videos, explanations, different materials, and set up times to answer their students' questions and provide support, their pacing can largely remain the same. There is a small handful of CTE classes and other instances where there's very specific things in labs where the pacing might be a little bit stretched out, or we might have to find an alternative activity to address a competency. Ms. Strecker, did you have something to add to that? I saw
No,
you.
I think you covered that well. We have teachers who've done video lessons and have them posted on Canvas. So for some teachers in algebra, for instance, you know, the students can watch the video of the lesson at home while the students who are in the classroom have the teacher instructing them in person. So it's just going to be, it's going to depend on the teacher, but I would not count on, I know teachers are very concerned about the concept of how do we cover all of our material if we're going to do that. They've already thought through that. So they're not planning to cut things in half to, you know, hold the lesson so that they can teach those same lessons on Thursday and Friday. There has to be some flexibility there.
Okay, I want to make sure where we're at. I have down hybrid. I know this is going to be close on here. Making sure, please speak up. I have Rochelle, Joel, Allison, Reagan, Robin, Clint, Jeff, I had Robin twice. There you go. Holly and Kathleen as hybrid. Is that correct? Anybody wanting to switch where they're at? Okay, and then I want to make sure I get everybody accounted for.
Heather, we do have 2 Robins on here, so I don't know if you had it twice for 2 reasons.
Oh, that is why I had it. Thank you.
Yeah, so, yeah.
I got you both. Okay. So we have 10 people over there. On the other, I'm just making sure I have Tim, Andy, Becky, Dr. Turner, Yvonne, Dr. Neatery, Nikki, Miss Tina, Luann, Shannon, Matt, and I didn't know where Katie, which way are you going?
I'm not sure you read my name either.
Okay. Yes. Where are you at, Burke?
In person.
Okay. Katie?
Same with me.
And John in person? Katie?
Correct.
Just need either way. I know it's not easy.
I don't know. I mean, when I think with my,
Are you abstaining? Yes. Is that what you want to do? No vote? Okay, abstaining, Katie. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I'm not voting either on that one. So we have 13 to 10 is what we have. I know it's close. I think there's lots of great discussion. I think this is, if you look at how this vote has closed in, I think these numbers this next week are going to, these next time, it's going to be pretty critical on that next gating meeting discussion. I think, you know, there are real concerns there, like we said, going at any level. I hope people, we've taken the last, what is it, almost a couple hours to work through that. So I know this was not an easy decision. So I appreciate the input. Looks like we are in person K through 12 for 2 weeks. And again, if something is needs to be looked at, we will do so. Okay. Thank you guys. Appreciate your time. Katie, the messaging that goes out, can you give us every week? We say when that will come out to notify people. Can't hear you.
I'm unmuted. I just saw hands. I don't know which, or bunch of hands. What do you want to do first?
Go ahead. What time, when does this message?
We'll plan to send at the same time we have, we'll aim for 4 o'clock.
Okay, 4 p.m. it will come out. Yvonne?
Do we need to look at mask and visitors and those steps?
Yeah. I appreciate that. You guys have to keep me on track on that one.
I think that's why the hands went up. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's jump on over to logistics then.
I think we should just leave it the same all the way down. I don't
agree
see any place where there would be a change.
Yep, I agree.
Let's expedite it.
Yep, short,
All
sweet.
I think
No
we should
change.
not go lax for sure.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Are we okay with that? Making sure Mr. Smith. Okay. All right. Thumbs up across the board. Thank you guys. That was quick. All right. Again, appreciate your input and we will see you in
We have another hand up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can we reiterate? I know that I'm just hearing the quarantine kids may be struggling with mental health stuff. Our teachers are, I mean, I know everyone is struggling, but I know we have resources that are on the website. Is there some way that those can be, I don't know if they're being sent to the quarantine kids or we can just put those out when we send this communication out to everybody, just that those resources are on the website for mental health if anybody's struggling. I know if you see it over and over and over again, you'll remember, oh, I saw that, that people can reach out and get help. So just a thought, if we could.
I'm looking probably between, so 2 things said, stuff about website. So let Katie talk about that. Letters and getting to quarantine people. Let Nikki talk about that.
I think 2 things. As far as I think that it's in the academic quarantine letters that schools are working on. As far as what specifically needs, we have a social emotional page on the website. It's in the process of being more enhanced. Loren and I were have been discussing that right now. It essentially just has a few resources, but kind of says that you can contact your school social worker. And but so we would just kind of need some wording or need to talk with what exactly we'd like to share on that. But yes, I think it's important to get out there for people.
Okay.
And Katie, I'm going to go on record again and saying that it's not just quarantine kids. There are kids in the building who are struggling as well. So we need to make sure it goes out to everybody, not just quarantine kids.
Struggling with all of this, and that's not even someone that's getting help from school. So I know it's everyone.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
And that's where I think even with this group, because I know some of you with a split like that, there's heavy feelings right now. And we've got to, I think, making sure we're supporting whatever we can do, because there are differing opinions. There's loads going on with people, and just know that we're going to continue to watch this and appreciate those suggestions as we're moving forward, and we'll try to get things out to people. If you see people too struggling, or kids, as you guys always do, I think working to try to connect them. The other piece is, I will say, and I've encountered that it is focusing on when we can those positives, because I think all of us are hearing everything that isn't working, So I think anytime we can focus on the positives is also uplifting. So I appreciate your time. So the positive leaving, you spent a lot of time today. There was a lot of meaningful discussion, and thank you for that. All right, with that, I think we're done. We will get that out at 4, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Some of you before. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.